Billy Bob Johnson wiped the sweat from his forehead as he checked the cargo manifest one last time. The loading dock of New Nashville Spaceport was hot and noisy, filled with the sounds of machinery and shouting workers. His ship, the Sweet Melissa, sat ready for departure, her worn hull telling stories of countless journeys across the stars. "That's the last of it, Billy," said Frank Miller, the old dockmaster, as he stamped the digital approval on his tablet. "You're all set for the frontier colonies." Billy Bob nodded and tucked his own tablet into the pocket of his faded jumpsuit. "Thanks, Frank. How's the traffic out there these days?" Frank's face grew serious. "Not good. Pirates have been hitting the Orion Transit Corridor hard this month. 3 cargo ships went missing last week alone." "Well, ain't that just perfect timing?" Billy Bob drawled, his Kentucky accent thick despite his years in space. "Got a shipment of medicine for New Dakota colony that can't wait. You might want to take the long route through the Jupiter waypoints," Frank suggested. Billy Bob shook his head. "Can't afford the extra fuel. Got bills to pay, and the bonus is only good if I deliver on time." Frank looked at the mysterious government crates that made up half of Billy Bob's cargo. "What's all that anyway?" "Don't know, don't ask," Billy Bob replied with a shrug. "Some government contract stuff. Triple sealed, triple the pay." Billy Bob walked around his ship one more time, his experienced eyes scanning for any issues. The Sweet Melissa wasn't pretty or new, but she was reliable. His father had passed her down to him, just as his grandfather had done before. 3 generations of Johnsons had hauled cargo across the solar system and beyond in this ship. Inside the cockpit, Billy Bob ran through his pre-flight checklist. The familiar routine was comforting. He flipped switches, checked gauges, and tested systems, while the ship's ancient eye assistant, Dolly, confirmed each step in her twangy voice. "All systems operational, Billy Bob," Dolly announced. "Engine performance at 92%. "Good enough," he muttered. The engines hadn't been at 100% in years, but 92 was better than last month. As the spaceport traffic controller gave him clearance for departure, Billy Bob felt the familiar excitement building in his chest. No matter how many times he left Earth, that feeling never went away. His grandfather called it the trucker's itch, that need to be moving, to be between the stars. The Sweet Melissa lifted smoothly, her engines humming as they pushed against Earth's gravity. Through the viewport, Billy Bob watched New Nashville grow smaller. Then the curve of Earth appeared, beautiful and blue against the blackness of space. Once clear of Earth's busy orbital lanes, Billy Bob set the course for the Orion Transit Corridor. The ship's jump drive would need 12 hours to charge before they could make the leap to faster-than-light travel. In his small cabin, Billy Bob took out an old paper photo of his family, his parents standing in front of the Sweet Melissa when she was newer and shinnier, his sister in her Earth Force uniform, and his grandparents on their Kentucky farm. Space trucking was lonely work, but it was in his blood. He heated up a meal of synthetic beef and beans, eating while he reviewed the star charts. The Orion Corridor might be dangerous, but he knew all the hiding spots and sensor blind spots from years of experience. If pirates came looking, he'd be ready. As Earth disappeared from his sensors, Billy Bob settled into the captain's chair for the long journey ahead. His grandfather always said a space trucker's life was made up of long stretches of boredom, broken by moments of pure terror. He hoped this trip would be all boredom, but something in his gut told him otherwise. The Sweet Melissa cruised into the darkness, carrying her cargo and her third-generation trucker toward the distant stars, unaware of the adventure waiting among them. 2 days into the journey, Billy Bob floated in the zero gravity of his ship's small kitchen. He made himself a sandwich with bread that never went stale and meat that had never seen a real animal. Space food had come a long way since the early days, but Billy Bob still missed his mama's home cooking. The Sweet Melissa hummed quietly around him as she sailed through the emptiness between stars. The jump drive was charged and ready. In another hour, they would make the leap to faster-than-light travel, cutting through the fabric of space to reach the Orion transit corridor. Billy Bob took a bite of his sandwich and checked the ship's systems on his tablet. All normal. The mysterious government cargo was secure in the hold, temperature stable, and no radiation leaks. A quiet trip so far. Then Dolly's voice came over the intercom. "Billy Bob, I'm picking up a distress signal." Billy Bob put down his sandwich and pushed himself toward the cockpit. "Show me." The main screen displayed a weak signal coming from a point about 3 hours off their planned route. Dolly played the audio. "This is the research vessel Curious Mind requesting immediate assistance. We have experienced a incident with study subject, crew, missing. Please help. Coordinates follow." The message cut in and out, breaking up with static. Coordinates followed, then the message repeated. Billy Bob frowned. "How old is this message, Dolly?" "Signal timestamp indicates it was sent 14 hours ago," Dolly replied. Billy Bob scratched his beard. The detour would cost him time and fuel. The delivery bonus was a good chunk of credits he had been counting on, but his grandpappy had taught him the code of the space lanes. Never leave a stranded soul drifting. "Dolly, calculate a new course to these coordinates. How much time will we lose?" "Calculating," Dolly said. "Detour will add approximately 8 hours to our journey. This will place delivery outside the bonus window." Billy Bob sighed. Money was tight, and that bonus would have helped with the sweet Melissa's next maintenance check. But there were people in trouble out there. "Set the new course, Dolly, and send a reply to their distress call. Let them know we're coming." "Course set." "Message sent," Dolly confirmed. Billy Bob returned to his half-eaten sandwich, his appetite gone. Something felt off about this situation. Research vessels usually traveled with escort ships, especially this far out. And what kind of study subject could make a crew go missing? 3 hours later, the sweet Melissa approached the coordinates from the distress call. Billy Bob slowed the engines and activated all sensors. "I have visual on the Curious Mind," Dolly announced. On the screen, a small, sleek vessel appeared. It was designed for scientific missions, with extended sensor arrays and laboratory modules. The ship appeared undamaged, drifting slowly with its running lights on. No signs of attack or mechanical failure were visible. "Life signs?" Billy Bob asked. "Detecting one human life sign," Dolly said. "Faint power signatures. Ship systems appear to be in low energy mode." Billy Bob checked his father's old service pistol, making sure it was charged. Then he grabbed his toolbox and Betsy, a heavy wrench that had saved his life more than once. "I'm going to dock and check it out," he told Dolly. "Keep the engines hot and be ready to leave fast if needed." "That is unadvisable," Dolly replied. "Safety protocols suggest waiting for proper authorities." Billy Bob laughed. "Out here, we are the proper authorities. Besides, someone might need help right now." He guided the sweet Melissa alongside the quiet research vessel. The docking procedure went smoothly, magnetic seals locking the ships together with a dull thud. As he prepared to enter the airlock, Billy Bob couldn't shake the feeling that whatever waited on the other ship would change his routine delivery run into something much more complicated. But turning back wasn't the Johnson way. With Betsy in one hand and his pistol tucked in his belt, he cycled the airlock and prepared to board the silent, Curious Mind. The airlock of the Curious Mind opened with a soft hiss. Billy Bob stepped inside, his boots making a dull thud on the metal floor. The air smelled clean, but with a strange hint of ozone, like after a lightning storm back home in Kentucky. "Hello," he called out. "Anyone here?" "I got your distress signal." Only silence answered him. The emergency lights cast long shadows down the narrow hallway. Billy Bob turned on his flashlight and moved forward slowly. The ship was too quiet. No hum of engines, no beeping of computers, just the sound of his own breathing and footsteps. The Curious Mind was much fancier than his old cargo hauler. Everything was new and shiny, with smooth walls and advanced equipment. As he walked through the main corridor, Billy Bob noticed small things out of place. A coffee mug on the floor, a tablet with a cracked screen, a jacket thrown hastily over a chair. Signs of people leaving in a hurry. The ship's bridge was empty. Screens showed the ship's systems running on backup power. Nothing seemed broken or damaged. Billy Bob checked the ship's log, but the last entries were corrupted, showing only jumbled characters and strange symbols. "This keeps getting weirder," he muttered to himself. A soft sound made him freeze. It came from somewhere deeper in the ship, like something being dropped or moved. Billy Bob gripped Betsy tighter and followed the noise. The research labs took up most of the ship's middle section. Through the glass doors, Billy Bob could see scientific equipment he didn't recognize. One lab was a mess, with papers scattered across the floor and a table flipped on its side. The sound came again, sharper this time. It was coming from the last lab at the end of the hall. "I know someone's in there," Billy Bob called out. "I ain't here to hurt nobody. Just checking if you need help." After a moment of silence, a woman's voice responded, shaky and afraid. "Who are you? How do I know you're human?" Billy Bob found the question strange, but answered anyway. "Name's Billy Bob Johnson. I'm a space trucker from Kentucky. Got your distress call and came to help. And last I checked, I was definitely human." The lab door opened a crack, and a pair of fearful eyes peered out. After a moment, the door opened wider. A woman stood there, holding a laser scalpel like a weapon. Her lab coat was dirty, and her dark hair was tied back in a messy ponytail. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Dr. Samantha Jones," she said, not lowering her makeshift weapon. "Chief researcher. Are you alone?" Billy Bob nodded. "Just me and my ship. The sweet Melissa, docked outside. Where's the rest of your crew?" Dr. Jones's eyes filled with tears. "Gone. They're all gone. It took them." "What took them?" Billy Bob asked gently. She pulled him into the lab and quickly closed the door. "We need to be quiet. It might still be here, hiding somewhere on the ship." The lab was in better shape than the others. In the center sat a strange object on a pedestal. It looked like a small pyramid made of a dark material, but when Billy Bob tried to focus on it, it seemed to shift and change, as if it wasn't fully in this reality. "What is that thing?" he asked. Dr. Jones looked at the object with a mix of fear and wonder. "That's what we were studying when everything went wrong. It's an artifact we found on an uncharted moon. We think it's over 1 million years old." Billy Bob kept his distance from the strange object. "And what happened to your crew?" Dr. Jones's voice dropped to a whisper. "We were running tests on the artifact. Then it activated somehow. A doorway opened. I can't describe what I saw properly, but shadows came through. Not normal shadows. They had eyes like dying stars." She paused, her hands shaking. "They took the others. Not violently. They just collected them, like they were specimens. I managed to hide in a maintenance shaft until they left. But I think one might still be on board, watching us." Billy Bob looked around the room nervously. "We need to get you off this ship. Come back to this sweet Melissa with me." "I can't leave the artifact," Dr. Jones said firmly. "It's too important. Whatever those things are, they want it. We can't let them have it." Outside the lab, something moved in the shadows of the corridor. A soft, sliding sound like silk on metal. Both of them turned toward the noise, holding their breath. Billy Bob aimed his flashlight at the darkness. For a brief moment, he thought he saw something shift and flow away from the light, something that didn't move like any living thing he'd ever seen. Billy Bob lowered his flashlight slowly, keeping his eyes on the dark corridor outside the lab. "Did you see that?" he whispered to Dr. Jones. She nodded, her face pale. "They move like that. Not walking. More like flowing." Billy Bob closed the lab door and locked it. "Tell me more about this artifact. What were you studying it for?" Dr. Jones moved closer to the strange pyramid. We found it buried on a moon at the edge of the Sigma sector. Carbon dating couldn't tell us its age. The methods just didn't work on its material. It's not made of anything we've ever seen before. Billy Bob walked around the pedestal, careful not to touch the artifact. Up close, it was even stranger. The surface seemed to ripple slightly, like water in a gentle breeze. The government sent us to study its properties, Dr. Jones continued. We discovered it gives off unusual quantum readings. It exists in multiple states simultaneously. Billy Bob scratched his beard. I don't understand all that science talk, but I know trouble when I see it. We need to leave it and go. Dr. Jones shook her head firmly. I can't abandon our research. This is the most important scientific discovery in human history. It could change everything we know about physics. Billy Bob looked at the artifact again. Something about its movements seemed familiar to him. The way it pulsed reminded him of something. You know, this thing moves a lot like the old CB radios we used to have in our trucks back on Earth, he said. The signal patterns would make these same kinds of waves when you were tuning between frequencies. Dr. Jones looked surprised. That's actually an interesting observation. We've been treating it as a doorway. But what if it's more like a communication device? Billy Bob moved closer. You said it activated when you were running tests. What exactly were you doing? We were sending various energy patterns through it, she explained. Radio waves, light waves, even sound. Billy Bob nodded slowly as an idea formed in his mind. My grandpappy taught me that sometimes the simplest solution is the right one. What if this thing just needs to be tuned right? Before Dr. Jones could stop him, Billy Bob reached into his pocket and pulled out an old metal tuning fork. It was a family good luck charm passed down through generations of space truckers. What are you doing? Dr. Jones asked in alarm. Just a hunch, Billy Bob said. He tapped the tuning fork against his wrench Betsy. It made a clear, pure tone. He held the vibrating fork near the artifact. At first, nothing happened. Then, the pyramid surface began to pulse in rhythm with the sound. The ripples became more organized, more deliberate. It's responding, Dr. Jones gasped. Billy Bob nodded. I think it might be like an old radio. Let me try something else. He reached into his toolbox and pulled out a small electronic device used to diagnose engine harmonics on the Sweet Melissa. He adjusted some dials, creating different frequency patterns. This is completely unscientific, Dr. Jones protested, but her eyes showed fascination. Sometimes practical beats theoretical, Billy Bob replied with a smile. As he adjusted the frequencies, the artifact's movements changed. Its surface shifted colors, from deep black to a shimmering blue. The pulsing became more regular, more controlled. I think it's stabilizing, Dr. Jones said in wonder. Suddenly, the top of the pyramid opened like a flower blooming. A beam of soft blue light shot upward, spreading across the ceiling. Within the light, patterns formed, lines and dots arranging themselves in a clear pattern. Stars, Billy Bob whispered. It's showing us stars. Dr. Jones stared in amazement. It's a star map. And look, there's a marker blinking. Among the star pattern, a single point pulsed with a brighter light. Do you recognize this system? Billy Bob asked. Dr. Jones nodded slowly. It's at the edge of mapped space, a system we've only observed from a distance. No one has ever been there. As they watched the map, a low hum began to emanate from the walls around them. Electronic systems that had been dormant suddenly flickered to life. Something's happening to the ship, Billy Bob said, looking around with concern. A voice came over the ship's intercom, not Dolly's familiar twang, but a flat, computerized tone. Subject located. Transmission complete. Recovery team en route. Billy Bob and Dr. Jones looked at each other in alarm. I think we just set off some kind of beacon, Billy Bob said. And I don't think we're gonna like who's coming to answer it. The lights on the Curious Mind flickered and dimmed. The star map projected by the artifact still glowed in the darkness, casting blue shadows across their faces. "We need to go now," Billy Bob said, grabbing his tools and shoving them back into his belt. Dr. Jones hesitated, looking at the artifact. "I can't leave it behind. Whatever's coming wants this, and we can't let them have it." Billy Bob sighed but nodded. "Fine. Grab it if you can move it safely." She carefully lifted the pyramid from its pedestal and placed it in a small containment case. The star map disappeared as soon as she moved the artifact, leaving them in the dim emergency lighting. "The ship's losing power," Dr. Jones said, checking a nearby console. "Whatever that beacon did, it's draining all systems." Billy Bob pulled out his communicator. "Dolly, you there? We need emergency evacuation. Prepare for quick departure." The only response was static. "Communications are being jammed," Dr. Jones said, her voice tight with fear. A low rumble shook the ship. It wasn't an engine sound. It felt like something massive was moving through the structure. "Let's move," Billy Bob whispered. "Stay close to me." They crept toward the lab door. Billy Bob pressed his ear against it, listening for any sounds in the corridor. Hearing nothing, he slowly opened the door and peered out. The hallway was dark except for a few blinking emergency lights. The shadows seemed deeper than before, almost solid in places. Billy Bob stepped out first, Betsy raised in one hand and his pistol in the other. They made it halfway down the corridor when the temperature suddenly dropped. Their breath came out in white clouds, and frost began to form on the metal walls. "It's here," Dr. Jones whispered. The shadows at the end of the hallway moved, not like something walking through them, but like the darkness itself was alive. It gathered and thickened, forming a shape that was almost human but wrong in subtle ways. Too tall, too fluid, with limbs that bent at impossible angles. 2 points of light appeared in the mass of darkness, like distant dying stars. They weren't eyes, not really, but they fixed on Billy Bob and Dr. Jones with clear intent. "Don't move," Dr. Jones breathed. "It might not attack if we don't run." Billy Bob had faced space pirates and meteor storms, but nothing had ever made his blood run cold like this. Still, he stepped forward, placing himself between Dr. Jones and the shadow. "We don't want no trouble," he said, his voice steady despite his fear. "We're just passing through." The shadow entity tilted what might have been its head. A sound filled their minds, not heard with ears but felt inside their thoughts. It wasn't words exactly, but somehow Billy Bob understood it. "The beacon. Give." Dr. Jones clutched the case with the artifact tighter. "It wants the artifact." The shadow entity moved closer, the darkness stretching toward them like reaching fingers. Billy Bob raised his pistol. "Stay back. I don't want to shoot, but I will." The entity paused. The star-like points brightened, studying Billy Bob with what seemed like curiosity. Different, the impression came in their minds. Not like others. Not afraid to stand. A new feeling washed over them. Not words, but a sense of urgency, warning. Images flashed in Billy Bob's mind. More shadows, hungry ones. Coming. This one was different. Running. Hiding. "I think," Billy Bob said slowly, lowering his weapon. "I think it's trying to help us. It's running from the others." Dr. Jones looked skeptical. "How can you tell?" "Just a feeling," Billy Bob replied. "My gut ain't been wrong yet." The shadow entity retreated slightly, then pointed toward the docking bay. "Leave. Now. Others coming." As if to confirm its warning, the ship groaned and shuddered. Distant metallic sounds echoed through the halls, like something large docking with the far side of the curious mind. "I believe you," Billy Bob said to the entity. "If you're helping us, come with us." "Billy, are you crazy?" Dr. Jones hissed. The shadow seemed to consider this, then condensed itself into a smaller, more compact form. "Go," it impressed into their minds. "We'll follow." Billy Bob nodded and grabbed Dr. Jones's arm. "Time to run. My ship's this way." They sprinted down the corridor toward the airlock where the sweet Melissa waited, the shadow flowing along the ceiling behind them. The sounds of metal tearing and strange, high-pitched noises grew louder behind them. Whatever was coming through the ship, Billy Bob had no intention of meeting it. Billy Bob and Dr. Jones ran through the darkened corridors of the curious mind. The shadow entity flowed above them, sometimes stretching ahead to scout the path, then returning to guide them away from danger. Almost there, Billy Bob panted as they rounded the final corner to the airlock. A crash echoed from deep within the ship, followed by a high-pitched sound that hurt their ears. The floor beneath them trembled. "They're breaking through the rear sections," Dr. Jones said, clutching the case with the artifact. The airlock door was just ahead. Billy Bob reached it first and punched in the emergency override code. The door slid open with painful slowness. Come on," he muttered. As they waited for the door to fully open, the shadow entity suddenly expanded, spreading itself across the ceiling like a protective canopy. In their minds, they felt its warning. Hide thoughts. They sense minds. Dr. Jones closed her eyes, concentrating. "It's saying the others can detect our thoughts. We need to clear our minds." Billy Bob didn't know how to hide his thoughts, but he focused on simple things. The feel of Betsy in his hand, the sound of his boots on the metal floor, the familiar smell of machine oil that always clung to his clothes. The airlock finally opened. They hurried inside, and Billy Bob sealed it behind them. Through the small window in the door, they saw the corridor lights flicker and die, plunging the hallway into complete darkness. "Cycle the lock," Dr. Jones urged. Billy Bob hit the controls. Air hissed as the pressure equalized with the sweet Melissa's airlock. The shadow entity compressed itself into a small dark ball that hovered near the ceiling. The outer door opened, revealing the welcoming interior of Billy Bob's ship. They scrambled aboard, the shadow flowing in after them. "Dolly, you there?" Billy Bob called out. "System rebooting," Dolly's voice replied, sounding different than usual. Unknown data interference detected. The shadow entity moved toward the ship's computer terminal. It spread itself over the screen, and strange patterns of light flickered beneath its darkness. "What's it doing?" Dr. Jones asked. "I think it's helping Dolly," Billy Bob said, watching in fascination. The shadow pulled back from the terminal. Dolly's voice returned, now normal again. "Systems restored. Multiple unknown vessels detected approaching. Recommend immediate departure." Billy Bob jumped into the pilot's seat. "Undock now, Dolly. Full power to engines as soon as we're clear." The magnetic seals disengaged with a clunk, and the sweet Melissa pushed away from the curious mind. Through the viewport, they saw dark shapes moving across the research vessel's hull, more shadow entities, but somehow different from their companion. These moved with sharp, jerky motions, like predators on the hunt. "They're not like you, are they?" Billy Bob said to their shadow, which had formed into a more defined shape beside him. The entity projected a feeling of difference and danger. Images filled Billy Bob's mind. A vast darkness between stars, shadows fleeing from shadows, hunters, and hunted. "I think I understand," Billy Bob said. "You're a refugee, running from your own kind." The shadow pulsed in agreement. Dr. Jones opened the containment case and studied the artifact. The beacon must have alerted both sides, our friend here and those hunters. The sweet Melissa shuddered as her engines roared to life. Billy Bob's hands flew over the controls, plotting a course away from the curious mind. "We need a name for you," he said to the shadow. "Can't just call you Shadow all the time." The entity swirled thoughtfully. It projected an image of a human man in overalls, working on a tractor. Billy Bob laughed. "You're pulling that from my memories. That's my Uncle Earl." "Fine, Earl it is then." Earl the shadow seemed pleased, pulsing with a soft blue light. On the scanner, multiple signals appeared, moving fast toward their position. They weren't registered in any human or allied species database. "We've got company," Billy Bob said grimly. "And they're coming in hot." Dr. Jones looked at the artifact, still projecting its faint star map. What about these coordinates? Could we jump there? Billy Bob checked the location. It's way beyond established routes. No idea what's out there. Earl flowed toward the star map, then toward the ship's navigation panel. The meaning was clear. You want us to go there? Billy Bob asked. Is it safe? The impression that came back wasn't exactly safety, but something like refuge, sanctuary. Alarms blared as the approaching ships accelerated. They would be in weapons range in minutes. Billy Bob made his decision. Dolly, input these coordinates for an emergency jump. And pray this old girl has enough juice to make it. The sweet Melissa shook violently as Billy Bob pushed her engines beyond safe limits. Warning lights flashed across the control panel. Behind them, the mysterious ships were gaining fast. We've got a problem, Billy Bob said, checking the jump drive readings. The coordinates are locked in, but the drive needs 3 minutes to warm up for a jump this far. Dr. Jones looked at the scanner. We don't have 3 minutes. Earl, the shadow entity, flowed anxiously around the cockpit. He projected images into their minds. Dark ships tearing apart anything they caught, consuming technologies and life forms alike. What are they? Dr. Jones asked. Earl's response came as feelings rather than words. Hunger, collection, assimilation. The hunters didn't just want the artifact. They wanted everything, including knowledge of human worlds. They're like cosmic librarians gone bad, Billy Bob muttered, collecting everything they find, whether it wants to be collected or not. A warning alarm blared. One of the pursuing ships had launched something toward them. Brace yourselves, Billy Bob yelled, throwing the sweet Melissa into a sharp dive. The ship rolled and twisted as Billy Bob used every piloting trick he knew. His years hauling cargo through pirate-infested space were finally paying off. The sweet Melissa wasn't fast, but she was tough and responsive in the right hands. 2 minutes to jump capability, Dolly announced calmly. A bright beam of energy shot past them, missing by meters. The hunter ships were firing weapons now. Can we fight back? Dr. Jones asked. Billy Bob shook his head. The sweet Melissa ain't a warship. She's got a small defense laser for clearing space debris, but nothing that would hurt those ships. Earl suddenly moved toward the engine room access. He projected urgent images, himself flowing into machinery, helping somehow. I think he wants to help with the engines, Billy Bob said. Dr. Jones looked concerned. Can we trust him? Billy Bob thought for a moment. He could have let those hunters take us already if he wanted to. I say we trust him. He nodded to Earl. Go ahead, buddy. Do what you can. Earl flowed through the access panel toward the jump drive. The ship rocked again as another energy beam grazed their shields. 1 minute to jump capability, Dolly announced. Shield strength at 60%. Billy Bob's hands flew over the controls, keeping the ship moving in an unpredictable pattern. Sweat dripped down his face. The sweet Melissa wasn't built for this kind of maneuvering. Suddenly, the engine pitch changed. The lights flickered, then glowed brighter. The jump drive indicator moved from red to yellow to green in seconds. Jump drive at full power, Dolly announced, surprise in her electronic voice. Ready for activation. What did Earl do? Dr. Jones asked in amazement. Don't know, don't care, Billy Bob replied with a grin. Let's get out of here. The nearest hunter ship loomed large in their rear viewport. It was close enough now that they could see its strange, organic-looking hull, covered in swirling patterns like Earl's body, but sharper, more aggressive. Jumping in 5 seconds, Dolly counted down. 4, 3. A tentacle of darkness shot from the hunter ship, stretching impossibly through space toward them. It almost reached the sweet Melissa's hull. 2, 1. Jump initiated. The stars stretched into lines around them as the jump drive activated. The dark tentacle snapped back, unable to maintain its grip as the sweet Melissa tore through the fabric of space-time. The violent shaking of the ship smoothed into a steady vibration. The viewports showed the swirling blue tunnel of jump space. They had escaped, for now. Earl flowed back into the cockpit, his shadowy form looking somehow depleted. "Thank you," Billy Bob said sincerely. "You saved us." Earl pulsed weakly in acknowledgement. Dr. Jones opened the artifact case, and the pyramid inside glowed with a soft light. Earl moved toward it, seeming to draw strength from its presence. "So," Dr. Jones said, looking at the navigation display showing their destination, "what do we do once we get wherever we're going?" Billy Bob leaned back in his pilot's chair and scratched his beard. "I reckon we got 3 days in jump space to figure that out. But one thing's for sure, I ain't making my delivery on time." He looked at the artifact at Earl, and then at Dr. Jones. His life had been the same routine for years. Pick up cargo, deliver cargo, repeat. Now he was jumping to an unknown part of space with a mysterious alien artifact, a scientist, and a friendly shadow creature, while being chased by cosmic hunters. "You know what?" Billy Bob said with a slow smile. "I think Grandpappy would be proud. This is turning out to be one heck of an adventure."